today's episode of Test, Optimize, and Scale. Very excited to have Gordon Einstein, founder of CryptoLaw Partners, here with us today.
I'm very happy to be here, and this has been a long time coming, and we pulled it off. I think, COVID facilitates some things. So
yes.
Here we
are. Absolutely. Schedules get a little easier. Remote conversations like this become a lot cleaner as well too. And Gordon, I've been at conferences with you in Asia, here in the US. Have actually been a guest on your show. Always enjoy those chats. Always enjoy that banter. So excited to have you on today and to be able to package that for the listeners.
And I have to say that the show you and I did together is, not that I get personally huge views, but that's the highest view video that's on my channel. And I think it's like we discussed before, I think it's a combination of you and the dinosaur in the background. So they work together well.
And in case you haven't seen the episode, it is a literal
classic
dinosaur, inflatable, but walking behind us randomly at home.
Gesticulating with its little Tyrannosaurus Rex arms. Yeah, it was awesome.
I think that was the thumbnail image. So
yes.
Definitely check that out after you listen here today. And Gordon, you're one of the top names in the legal space globally, I may add, when it comes to cryptocurrency, fintech. I like to say, entrepreneurship as a whole. So could you tell the audience a bit about yourself, your history, everything you've done to date?
Everything I've done would take a while because I seem to be over half a century old, but I'll give the short version. So like you mentioned, I'm an attorney. I'm based in Los Angeles, California. That being said, my practice has, like crypto, a very strong global or international aspect to it. My law practice is exclusively related to cryptocurrency and blockchain projects and sort of the penumbra around those. When I first started practicing back in 1995, I'll date myself a little bit, I was doing estate planning, business, and tax, which is actually slightly more interesting than it sounds. But at some point, 5 or 6 years in, I had enough and I started a computer consulting business. But then when I somewhat late discovered Bitcoin and blockchain, say 2014 or so I'm not an OG, but I'm not like new to the game. When I discovered it, it took me a while to wrap my head around it. Some people read the Satoshi white paper and had this instant epiphany. It took me a couple exposures to it. But once it hit, the effect was so powerful that I did the unthinkable, which is, having previously escaped from the practice of law, I went back into the dragon's mouth and started practicing law again, because I found the Bitcoin, blockchain, cryptocurrency space and what it offered to humanity and to society so completely compelling. Specifically, I had two related epiphanies. It was, number one, that blockchain needed law and blockchain related technologies needed law, but related to that was that law itself needed what blockchain technologies had to offer. In other words, the things I had found possibly distasteful or inefficient or suboptimal about the way that law was practiced could, to a certain extent, be alleviated through these new techniques and these new technologies. So that's made me very enthusiastic for this practice. And like you mentioned, I've been fortunate in that I'm not just sort of practicing this area of law behind the curtain, but I've been invited to speak at just a huge number of conferences around the world. And since COVID has picked up, I seem to be doing one speaking engagement per day, trying to sleep, trying to work out, trying to practice law, trying to maintain a relationship, all that other stuff. So it's a little bit of a challenge. And also, I've started my own show recently, the Crypto Wednesday show. So it's been busy, but yeah, it's been very rewarding practicing in this area. And I'm fortunate enough to have met you. So there you go.
Yeah, and always enjoy your perspective. You provide that realism and an easy to digest fashions for founders, which I know.
Didn't you refer to me as blunt recently or something like that? Or direct, or is candid? I think it was candid.
Yeah.
That was a nice word.
Productively blunt. Maybe something along those lines.
Beautiful, yes. Yeah, some people call it a technique. The reality is I just can't help it. So, there you go.
Sure. Well, I've seen the impact firsthand, seeing some of the groups that you've been able to work with alongside their success. And I like how you mentioned the conferences, because when I think of you, I imagine that you're traveling somewhere, maybe in Eastern Europe, somewhere at any given point. You probably are at airports a good amount on a normal year. How has that transition been? I imagine you have a huge list of countries you've spoken at this point, but how's that transition been for you this year from conferences over to speaking in front of your computer?
Well, like everything else, like everything, like technology in general, like blockchain, everything is a mixed bag. Nothing, nothing is good or bad except that we make it so. It's just a different set of phenomena that we have to roll with and interpret and adapt to. So without sort of labeling it moralistically, I'd say it's, well, I'll give a little bit of emotion here. Like it's, for someone who, so one thing I really love about blockchain and crypto is, as a side effect of this practice, it allowed me to travel in a way that I never could before. There was a solid 25 years where, not counting Mexico, I did not leave the United States. And
Wow.
as someone who grew up, my dad was German, as someone who grew up with an international perspective, studied international politics in school, studied in Germany when I was in college, traveled decently, picked up some other languages. It was a kind of a dead zone time of my life, and not a small one. I mean, that's a quarter of a century. And then the crypto and blockchain opened up, kicked open the doors of the world to me. And like you mentioned, yes, started off in Eastern Europe, but quickly Europe, Middle East, Asia, a decent amount, Thailand, Japan, Korea. It just became globetrotting in this way, sort of doing the conference circuit, yet actually also producing good work and working on interesting projects. It's been now, I semi-recently, I actually had my second wedding anniversary yesterday. So
Congrats.
thanks. Yeah, there you go. Trying to keep all these balls juggling. Of course, getting married slows you down a bit, or speeds you up in some areas, slows you down in others. My globetrotting got somewhat inhibited by that, and then COVID hit. And I did manage to go to Croatia for a couple of weeks and do some cool shows from there and do some work. But other than that, it's been pretty much Los Angeles and Big Bear. It really cut back on the travel. And it took away some of the joy of traveling, but I think it was probably also better for my waistline and my health and my sleep and my consistency of work and product to not be traveling quite so much. And one thing that was happening during the prior period is I really was hesitant of ever turning down a conference invitation, because you never know where stuff comes from. But that logic only gets you so far, because like I said, you do have to sleep at some point. Now that choice has been taken away from me, but in a very zen way, I've sort of accepted it. The flip side of this is that where once remote conferencing, like what we're doing right now, was unusual or frowned upon or considered not as legit as real, it's now just become the default for obvious reasons, especially if you're in the US and have our wonderful COVID policies. And it's become normal. So in an interesting way, I've expanded my circle of friends and relations through remote conferencing. A friend of mine who runs an investment firm recently made the comment in front of a whole bunch of people. It's like, Gordon and I are really good friends, but I don't think we've ever actually met, in person. Yet, I talk to him all the time. It allowed me to launch the Crypto Wednesday shows. It's, it's been back and forth. Now I'm at home right now. This is not my real background. I'm subbing in for my office, and as I mentioned to you, prior to the recording, I have two cats with me, so they make cross in front of me. There's a comfort aspect to it, there's a convenience aspect to it, but it's also good to get out of the house every once in a while, so you can relate to this. So
yes,
it's a mixed bag. That being, I guess I'll also point out, just maybe because of the amount of social media I've been doing, or just because time has passed, or God knows what, my practice has just really taken off. And like I mentioned, I kind of reinitiated in 2014. It hasn't been that long in law practice years, but I'm very lucky to be involved in several interesting DAO projects and DeFi projects, and it's been good.
Very nice. Very nice. Sounds like you've really been able to embrace the positive elements of it. Like you said, you're able to speak at a different show every day without having to change hotel rooms, focus on your health, focus on family, be able to balance it all out. I've definitely noticed some pluses in that regard as well, where I'll speak at 2 different conferences in the same day. I don't have to change my setup. I'm good to go, and then right back to calls and work later that day. Used to joke around being at airports and hotels and traveling around town. That was 99% of speaking. Where only like a few minutes you're actually on stage. The rest of it is all these other things. So being able to remove it is good for efficiency. Of course, doesn't replace that handshake and face-to-face contact, or even some of the fun moments of traveling.
Otherwise known as not socially distancing.
Yeah.
Right? all the things we're not allowed to do now.
Sure. And when you do see somebody, it's awkward. You're like, do I shake your hand? Do I not?
Well, I kind of picked up this thing because, part of COVID is I picked up meditation, and there's a guru on YouTube I actually really like, Sadhguru, it's my new thing. And, he's like doing this thing. I just kind of picked it up. So yeah, that's my adaptation.
Widely accepted on a global level.
Yeah.
I could see it. Yeah. I could see it. And you were talking about
one other one I just got, there's now the COVID handshake where you put your elbow to the other person and pop elbows. So that's my other favorite.
For me, it's more of that handshake. We both look at each other kind of weird, then almost a hug, then an elbow. So there's like a few movements before that. You don't know what to do.
That's pretty dope. That's pretty OG there. Okay.
Not always intentional, but it happens. And you were mentioning for blockchain and for cryptocurrency, it wasn't just your own personal interest in fintech as a whole, but the need for legal in this vertical, in this industry. I imagine that is difficult to gauge and keep track of with all different types of international law, jurisdictions, rules, potentially accepting investors from different areas. How have you navigated through these seas? How have you established your process and been able to structure groups working with you accordingly?
Great question. Well thought out question. I'd say it is a blend of, so I think Deng Xiaoping, ex-premier of China, said cross the river by feeling the stones, or maybe that's a Chinese expression in general. So I've definitely crossed the river by feeling the stones. This is, blockchain law is interesting. I'll just call it blockchain law for convenience, or I call it crypto law, actually. Crypto law is interesting because even though cryptocurrencies and blockchain are new, legal concepts aren't. And so there's a interesting creative friction between taking old concepts of law and porting them to this new area, which is sort of the default starting position for almost everyone who's a lawyer, and then recognizing what's different, both in the application of these prior concepts and also recognizing that some new concepts may arise as a result of this being a new thing. So you can't necessarily, you can kind of use the prior concepts as a starting place, but if you get too enmeshed in that, you may miss the fact that every once in a while something new happens. The internet is new. Okay, the distributed autonomous organizations, or DAOs, are new. They may be evocative of what happened before, like internet is evocative of prior networking protocols, or maybe the phone system, but it definitely was a new thing when it came. And distributed autonomous organizations may be evocative of associations or clubs or partnerships or things that we're used to, but they're not that. They're different. And when that happens, there's a space that opens up for new legal concepts to come in. So it's been an interesting challenge because again, I stopped practicing law for a while. I was sort of retired from law and doing tech, and coming back in, I had to refire up all those synapses with the concepts I had picked up before, learn some new areas of traditional law. Like I've become, with all due modesty, a securities law guru, and that is through huge amounts of effort post going back into crypto law. That's not something I had before, but I just realized that securities law is so ingrained and essential to almost all these projects, taking on investors, what you can say about issuing tokens, all this and that I just had to pick it up. I've also been fortunate enough to partner and network with several other good attorneys and firms in different jurisdictions. And some attorneys are very good in sort of sticking in their lane. I'm not necessarily so good in that because I find so many things so interesting, but I know when to bring in others and collaborate with them, and have developed my skill set in terms of working or playing well with others. So, I juggle. I'm just doing what I got to do, but it's been working.
Sure. And what are the processes? So if you speak to a group tomorrow and they're starting from, the ground floor, stage one, what type of timelines, what type of considerations, what type of questions are you answering for these groups in terms of what they need to do before going live, whether it's a new DeFi project or just something utilizing blockchain technology?
But another good question. I'm going to take it on. I'll frame it slightly differently, but I will answer If I was sitting in a room, I mean, great visual. So suppose I'm sitting in a room or a conference, and there's 100 budding crypto blockchain entrepreneurs in front of me, right at the I have an idea stage. Well, what do I tell them? Well, the first thing I would, and I do always tell them is, yes, this is all new, but make no mistake about it. Your crypto and blockchain startup is a startup. Okay, there's a neat technological wrapper around it, or a neat technological product related to it, but you have traditional issues of forming an entity or entities, so you don't have personal liability. You have issues of how do you compensate people. You have issues about how are things taxed. You have big intellectual property issues. I mean, we're living, especially in blockchain, we're living in sort of an independent contractor world. And the default rules under independent contractor law is, unless you have a written agreement to the contrary, if you hire someone to create something for you, like intellectual property, there's a decent chance that that person may own the results of that labor. Now, you may get a sort of a license back, but if you're hiring someone to develop some software or a blockchain platform, you want to own it, or you want to open source it and have the ability to open source it. If a contractor does a part of it and you don't have an appropriate agreement in place and you end up being successful, you don't want that person showing up 2 years later saying, hey, I own half your company, we were partners. So to a certain, one thing I try to do as an attorney is I try not to be a buzzkill. I don't want to make people nervous so they get paralyzed. And it's kind of normal for startups to create a bit of a mess when they start and then clean it up afterwards. You can see that with Facebook. Mark Zuckerberg had to sort of pay off his early investors, and the Winklevoy twins and Edward Savener, or I forget his name exactly. But look at him now. So, but the more you can do damage control at the beginning while still accomplishing your mission, the better. And you want to, and especially if you're in a position where you're going to have to take in external capital to grow. In other words, you're not going to grow through returns on your operations, which is common. It's very hard to do that. You really need external capital to grow if you're a blockchain or crypto company. You need to have a good setup so that when the investor does their due diligence, they're not finding gaping holes in your setup, that they're finding a clean cap table or capitalization table. There's all these things you can do. And and there's a balance. No one wants to spend a lot of money on legal in the beginning, especially when they don't have it, but it will save you a lot later on. And it will help you get a lot more investment later on if you do things correctly. So number one piece of advice, number one question I would preemptively assume that they're going to ask me that I would answer is, just treat your startup, whatever technology is involved in, as a startup. Now, if you allow me, I'll nuance that slightly because things have changed a bit in the past 6 months or a year or so, specifically related to decentralized finance and DAOs, distributed autonomous or decentralized autonomous organizations. The vastly decentralized nature of these things, even going beyond regular blockchain, makes the concept of a startup a little bit more attenuated than it used to be. You can't really call a DAO a startup. You can't really call a DeFi contract or nexus of contracts a startup. We're beginning to bridge over into the world where there's something beyond what happened before. This is what I talked about when I said new legal concepts alive. I still think you need to, talk to your lawyer, but the lawyer should have enough situational awareness and trend awareness to understand that even an up-to-date blockchain or crypto law attorney needs to rethink their ideas when facing these two areas. So we're beginning to wiggle out of traditional law in some areas. We're not quite there yet, but I'm seeing the advent of that, and it's pretty exciting.
Very exciting. I mean, you're literally at the forefront of this, and I haven't even heard of all of the compliance around a DAO specifically. Imagining a lot of DeFi questions as a whole these days. Everyone watching the space has seen how much activity there's been.
Is it a security? Are you a money transmitter who pays taxes? Do you have anti-money laundering responsibilities? It gets heavy. The question is, do you not worry about any of that? Make your $2,500 billion and then try to clean it up later. There's an argument for that. Or you kind of get into compliance at the beginning. It's a weird issue, because once you dip your toe in the water, the shark may jump out and bite you, the legal shark. So a lot of people want to keep their heads down and just plow ahead, get their money, move to Ibiza, stick their assets, somewhere, and then hire some lawyers to clean it up. Because percentage-wise, it may be less, but lots of interesting discussions and lots of interesting people.
I think I know some of the people you're talking about there.
And we have many friends in common.
Yeah, and that's
some are my clients, but I can't say who they are.
Sure.
Sorry, go ahead.
Attorney-client privilege there, right?
Yep.
So that's if it works, of course. On the marketing side, we're able to kind of stay in our lane and say, you really need to speak to your counsel about compliance, make sure everything's set up there. Once there's approval, we can go live with it. But you're facing these questions head on and looking to get answers there. And, looking at the concept of the show, test, optimize, scale, like you said, it's so much smarter to preemptively approach all of these things and be able to set up a stronger foundation long term, unless you have that getaway plan, as you're touching on there a bit. But in terms of
if you're not 18 and you're not Ross Albrecht, and you're not doing Silk Road, maybe. I think when you hit a certain demographic and have some assets, you got to kind of go.
Yeah.
Having no assets makes it easy, and having a lot of assets make it easy. When you're in the middle, that's the pain point.
Right. Don't know which direction to go there. But still, I strongly recommend groups, get all of this set up while they're in the process of getting established versus later. I've seen the flip side. I've seen it where groups are getting approached by regulating bodies with questions, hopefully not worse, but just about what occurred. So definitely a good place to be setting yourself up. And then what about the secondary questions? What about groups that have already done, let's say years back, a token sale, current years some type of launch? What type of questions are they generally approaching with? Is it for new updates to the laws, or where do you stay busy?
The SEC hasn't come after me yet. Will they? My prior investors haven't come after me yet. Will they?
Mm-hmm.
How do I take this project that I thought was a good idea, where I still have investor money, and pivot to a new project without pissing off all my prior investors? That's a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, this partner turned out to be a bum. How do I get rid of him? Can I relocate to another country, and should I? Can I protect myself by setting up a DAO? It's a challenging and exciting world. And I think from your perspective, from a marketing perspective, if you're pivoting your business model, a lot of people had ideas in 2016, 2017, and they were raising all this money, and then they went quiet. And everyone likes to say, it's a exit scam, or it's a scam, or blah, blah, blah. I think people are very preemptive in saying that, because the whole premise of an ICO is it's not traditional capital raising where you're raising money along the curve and then you finally do an IPO when you have a big business and everything is already sort of established. The whole premise of an ICO is it's crowdfunding at the very beginning of a process. So it's normal and expected that's going to take time for that process or product to come into fruition. But where I think this is in your bailiwick, where you don't actively, if someone fails to actively manage their community and expectations post raising the money, and they go kind of quiet, that's where the scam drums start beating, even if everyone is well intentioned. And the reason they're not communicating is because they're working. So this is a place I think where the legal and the marketing or community aspects intersect, because if you proactively communicate and communicate correctly, you can head off the need for someone like me. And I'm telling clients, it's like, you can't just go silent. You can't have a super active Telegram during the ICO and then go quiet the moment you raise the money. That looks weird.
Right.
So it's interesting times. I have a lot of clients moving to Singapore. So for what's that?
There you go. There you go. And the communication strategy is so important. I want to quote you on that and call it legal advice. I won't, but just to show groups, because a lot of brands that we work with will say, hey, we just raised, we're good for a while. We'll be able to do user acquisition in a year.
Like,
but
no.
Exactly. Because then, everyone's perspective goes to their own creation, and who knows what's really occurring. And of course, the comment boards get wind of that, and there's arguments about what's actually happening.
Yep.
Where, simple content strategy, being able to have specific events going out through a structured calendar can make all of the difference. And again, create that narrative for the audience so they know what to base it on. Even if there's delays, and even if they're, heads down working, there's still some type of outward, conveyance of what's occurring.
Yep. I'll add some gloss to that. Though there's complete silence, which is a horrible strategy. Then there's sort of active reactivity, where you're generally silent, but if someone says something bad, you come out and tell the truth and set the story straight and all that other stuff, like crisis management mode. And then there's what I call the Jedi level or the ninja level, which is proactive framing. If you're out there proactively framing what's going on, proactively communicating, proactively maintaining your relationships, when someone wants to come out and say, oh, it's a scam, you're not in a reactive mode, because they're playing in your, they're in your house, right? And you're the master, you are the house, and they have kind of play by your rules. They're in your matrix, if you like. If you're aware of what people are saying, but not actively forming the narrative and not actively forming the environment, you can kind of sometimes diffuse things, but you're always going to be behind the 8 ball. So it's a challenge.
Sure. And there's been new breakthroughs in the world of equity crowdfunding recently.
Yes.
I know this isn't necessarily a core focus of yours, but I know we've talked about these vehicles in the past, so would love to get your perspective on it. What do you think about the news updates about potential increases to Reg CF and Reg A filings?
Well, there was reasons why it wasn't a core interest of mine. The Reg CF, which of course stands for crowdfunding, was fantastically unwieldy. The cap of what you could raise before, was $1 million, which is okay. That's nice, because the amount of work that was involved, you may have a different perspective, but from my perspective, the amount of work that was involved with it, and the low amount you could raise, and the fact that you have to manage all these little stakeholders, and it's like the Pareto principle, the 20% of your investment or resources produce 80% of the outcome. And when you have to deal with all these little nickel and dime investors with their little concerns and your compliance requirements, I mean, sorry, this may sound condescending, but it's like, who has time for that? For $1 million, that's not even a condo in Los Angeles, I hate to say. So it's like, what's the point? And I'm going to distinguish a couple of things. Reg A, the original Reg A, was also unwieldy beast. When the Jobs Act came in 2013, it made it into Reg A plus, and created sort of 2 tiers of Reg A, one of which you could raise $50 million, not have to engage in the sort of compliance that you did before, and do sort of a mini IPO. It was interesting, and the money was certainly much more substantial, especially if you wanted to do sequential Reg A pluses. But still, it's kind of a hassle, because the offering circular you do for a Reg A plus is pretty similar to a regular prospectus that you do for an IPO. You're not really saving that much complexity. Now, that should not, once you're talking about $50 million, the amount of money involved in doing an offering circular and getting it right isn't that much of a barrier, but it's not nothing. And it's like it's still a little heavy. I don't think anyone's really solved the issue of how can you provide an appropriate amount of information without providing an overwhelming amount of information with Reg A plus. But like you're alluding to, the cap for Reg A plus is being raised to 75 million, so, which is a 50% jump, which is substantial. So the math keeps on getting a little bit better. I'd like to see it at 100 million or maybe 250 million, because $1 billion isn't what it used to be. Apple was the first $1 billion. I remember when Apple hit $1 billion, everyone was really excited. It's like $1 billion is like Soros's daily budget for either undermining or supporting democracy, depending on which side of the fence you're on. So, I guess from my perspective, CF just from my perspective, my practice, I'd say CF just became something worth looking at, though maybe not doing. But 5 million is real money, and if you've got good programmers and you know what you're doing, that can be enough to launch a blockchain project. You don't necessarily need more.
Absolutely. And we've found value even in the current Reg CF by finding these user owners and turning your customers into retail investors in your brand. Some of the portals have been setting it up where all investors sit on one seat of the cap table, and different perspectives on how to structure that. Definitely excited about 5 and what that opens up. 50 to 75, also a massive difference with the type of companies that can potentially attract here. We've worked with some groups.
Actually, let me jump in and let me signal amplify what you're saying. Because yes, I'm deeply aware of your expertise in crowdfunding and sort of not crowdfunding on several levels. There's the Reg CF crowdfunding, but there's also crowdfunding or community building behind a project that's coming, sort of the Indiegogo or Kickstarter model. And correct. Yes, you're pointing to an extremely valid thing, which is if you want to really pull off a CF, if you really want to pull off a Kickstarter, Indiegogo, more than ever, you talk to your investors like they're brand fanatics. You want a community that's engaged on what you're doing, not. Of course, your entity should produce a profit, then should produce a return, but you need to be 100% on point with the messaging and the community building and your mission and what you're about, and having video and knowing the team members. And I know you've done great work with that. The CFs that I've seen that have done, it's a tough lot of work with at $1 million. It's kind of like, it's hard to work with. But the ones that got any traction at all worked with someone like you to get the narrative out there and get people excited about it. So my hat goes off.
Thanks, and I appreciate that. I know you work with all types of groups, so that that feedback really stands out to me there. And being able to leverage a successful Reg CF and take it into a Reg A plus, that's the dream for everyone going into a Reg CF, or maybe a side-by-side Reg D, which is only open to accredited investors. But to be able to take on more is a common thing that we hear of, but we're actually doing it. We're 4 rounds in with some of our clients, 3 rounds in with others, where they just completed 2 Reg CFs. Now they're on a Reg A plus. I'm curious to hear, do you think there'll be more activity around tokenized versions of Reg CF, Reg A plus? We've worked on some campaigns where tokens are bonused in addition to equity. Do you see that evolving at all?
So that's tough. Again, I haven't completely dived into this, but Reg A plus has an issue in that you have to get a transfer agent involved when you're transferring the stock. You can't just issue it, peer to peer, if you like. And there's been some progress made in blockchain-based or transfer agents who can work with tokens, but as far as I know, that hasn't been completely nailed down yet. So there's some impediments there, and both CF and Reg A plus seem mostly oriented towards equity, selling shares in the company, traditional equity, not debt, not exotic instruments. Now you again, I'd have to go back into it. I don't know if you actually can't do debt, but I believe pretty clearly that CF is equity, and I believe A plus is too. Don't. Of course, I'm on video, but don't necessarily quote me on that. The issue with tokens is that, sure, if you're tokenizing legacy equity securities, equity shares, then that's plausible. But if you're creating what's useful, like a utility token, or a token that blends security with utility, or something that's new, like it's a hybrid or just has a new functionality or new model. It's not entirely clear that that taxonomy works with what CF and Reg A Plus have in mind. And unlike a Reg D, you need to get these approved. Reg A Plus needs to get approved by the SEC. You can't just do a Reg A Plus, and they don't move fast, and you have to explain things to them, and you have to revise, and you can kind of stall out. And that's why, unfortunately, after the Jobs Act, there was some A plus activity, but not a ton. Now the pot's gotten a little bit sweetened at 75 million, but still, it's like it's not quite worked out. I think to get to what you're saying, I think you can do token kickers on top of equity, and it's like buy one share of stock and get this shirt for free. Okay, well that might fly, except now the shirt's a token. But it's an interesting hypothetical. I just haven't seen it done rigorously yet. What I think would fly is you do your CF or your A plus with traditional equity for a blockchain company, and then make separate offerings under Reg D or Reg S, which is the foreign exemption, for your tokens. That's how I've been taking most. Like I said, I haven't done CF or A plus, but if I were to advise a client who's interested in that, and again, I might do that with CF, I'd say do CF for your equity sale, and then do Reg D for equity plus tokens, and do Reg S for going abroad. And if someone wants to understand what I just said, they can come hire me, and that's why I make the big bucks.
Absolutely. And you're going to break it down for anyone to be able to pick up. And yeah, just a lot of different terminology for the type of filing, how much could be raised, what type of investors you could accept from.
Yeah, and on YouTube, I actually taught several classes on securities law and raising capital, and it's all on the YouTube channel, and those were recorded. So, but yes, to actually do it. For better or for worse, you need a lawyer. To be honest, part of the reason I went into blockchain and crypto law was to work myself out of a job. Because it's not just that blockchain and crypto need law, it's that law need blockchain and crypto. You shouldn't have to worry about a accredited investor. You shouldn't have to worry about Reg D, Reg CF. What does this all mean? Entrepreneurs should create. So it's a long battle, but I want to work with regulators and law to sort of, like I said, work myself out of a job. Hopefully in very nice fashion and style after that, but I'd be okay with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that your commitment to their success, not just, getting them structured and moving on. Wrapping up here, wanted to basically just get your recommendations, for a founder who's listening in, what should they be in vision of? What have you seen as consistent factors in the biggest groups that you've worked with, the biggest success stories you've worked with in cryptocurrency, and how they've been able to scale? Do you have any recommendations that you have for the founders listening in today, and thoughts that they should, be thinking of, be whiteboarding out today?
Yes, it is very hard to do something just by yourself. You almost always need co-founders, but be really, really careful, maybe not careful, be very thoughtful about who your co-founders are. Be thoughtful about that you're both committed to the same project. Be thoughtful about that you have similar visions long-term, because things change, and life's rough. And just take a deep breath. You're essentially married to your co-founders. You're going to see I know this from personal experience, you're going to see your co-founder more than you're going to see your husband or wife or whoever you're with, or your significant other, whatever the term is. It just is. It's a marriage, and the co-founder divorces are often just as expensive, if not more expensive, than marital divorces. But you need to work with other people. So it's not to scare people away. It's just think. And the urge is people feel comfort in numbers, and the urge is to bring on co-founders and to bring on partners. But in some ways, equity is forever. If you pay someone for the job done, fine, thanks. But equity ownership or share ownership or percentage of interest rolls on and on and on. So get your team right, get it tight, and have a distinction in your mind. Like, do I need this person for 3 months or 3 years? 3 months, make them an independent contractor or cut them some kind of other deal. If it's 3 years, consider them from founder. If it's a year and a half, make them like a junior level founder. Like, get your core team in place and then negotiate, because it's a lot easier to negotiate smaller percentages when the initial group is already in and already kind of formed. And again, it's just like everything else. You want to set the context in advance, so you're not letting the other person create the context for you. It's a good guide to life. And that doesn't mean you don't listen. That doesn't mean you're not responsible. That doesn't mean you don't adjust your position. But think about what you want in advance and form it proactively. And of course, right back at you. That's where messaging comes in. Think about what you want to think about your brand, like who you are, and then shine that out in the world.
Mm-hmm. Great guide to life, and definitely applicable. And some of the obstacles I've seen startups face in all different verticals of tech, I may add. But like you said, just because you're a blockchain startup doesn't mean you're not a startup. There's a reason these are common obstacles, and thinking it right out of the gate with this in mind can make the world of difference.
Yes, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Well, very nice, Gordon. I can't thank you much for. I can't thank you enough.
Can't thank me much. Today. Yes, you can. I know you can.
Can't thank you enough for joining today and dropping knowledge on us. I imagine we'll get some questions from the show here. If anybody wants to reach out to you directly, what is your preferred method of communication?
There's a form. There's a few ways. There's a form on CryptoLawPartners.com that they can fill out and reach me. They can email me at geinstein@CryptoLawPartners.com. There's LinkedIn, there's Facebook, there's Telegram. But if you reach out to me on Telegram, I get so many crypto scammy reach outs that you should immediately say, "Hi, Gordon. I'm not calling you about a crypto investment. I'm calling you about law stuff." So that's a good idea. That will save you a torrent of abuse that I unload on these scammers.
It's good that you do. Everyone on Telegram has a deal that you need to invest in.
Yeah.
So exactly. I can appreciate that. And again, Gordon, thanks. Always a pleasure speaking with you. Glad we're able to showcase this for the audience here and for all listeners. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it. Talk to you soon.